Two police officers thought they were making a routine arrest. Just another day of flexing their authority. What they didn't realize was that the woman they humiliated would one day sit in judgment over them. Not in the streets, not in the station, but in the courtroom, with the power of the law on her side. It started like countless other incidents across America. A sunny day, a black woman minding her own business, and a pair of officers convinced she didn't belong. To them, she was suspicious simply for existing where they didn't think she should. What began as an afternoon of peace soon twisted into a public spectacle, handcuffs, humiliation, and the sting of injustice. But what makes this story unforgettable is not just the wrongful arrest, it's the turn of fate that followed. Because weeks later, those same officers would walk into a courtroom and find themselves face to face with the very woman they once dragged away. Only this time, she held the gavel. Before we dive deeper into this story, make sure you subscribe to our channel Hidden Black Stories, where we uncover powerful, real, and inspired stories of resilience, injustice, and triumph that the world needs to hear. Now let's begin. It was a bright afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado. The park pulsed with life. Children racing after kites, joggers pacing the trails, and families settling beneath the shade of tall oak trees. It was the kind of setting that suggested calm, freedom, and safety. Among this scene sat Camille Johnson, a respected attorney known for her sharp mind and relentless pursuit of justice. She had fought countless battles for her clients, but today she sought something much simpler: peace. With a thick hardcover book resting on her lap, Camille allowed herself a rare break from her demanding schedule. She was the picture of composure, poised, focused, and serene. For once, the law, the courtroom, and the endless demands of her profession were far behind her. But as is often the case for black professionals in America, tranquility could be shattered in an instant. The first sign came in the form of screeching tires. A police cruiser pulled up along the curb, jolting the attention of nearby onlookers. Two officers stepped out, their presence heavy with suspicion rather than protection. Their gaze swept over the park, but quickly locked onto Camille, the lone black woman reading quietly by the pond. To them, she wasn't an accomplished attorney. She wasn't a respected member of her community. She wasn't even a woman enjoying her afternoon. To them, she was simply out of place. What followed was a pattern too many know well: demands for identification, insinuations of criminal intent, the unmistakable weight of bias disguised as routine procedure. Camille's calm exterior masked the quickening of her heartbeat, but she refused to waver. Years in the courtroom had taught her composure, yet nothing could fully prepare her for the indignity of being treated as less than human for doing absolutely nothing wrong. The officers questioned her relentlessly. Why was she there? Was she alone? Why did she have that book? Each query carried less curiosity and more accusation, as though her very presence demanded justification. A small crowd began to gather, uneasy murmurs spreading through the air. Some watched silently. Others pulled out phones, uncertain but aware that something wasn't right. When Camille refused to entertain baseless questions any further, the encounter turned. The officers closed in, their tone hardening, their posture aggressive. And in the blink of an eye, one reached for her arm. The words, "Stop resisting," filled the air. A claim made not from reality, but from routine. Words designed to justify what came next. Cold metal cuffs clamped around her wrists as humiliation surged through her chest. In moments, Camille went from a woman enjoying a book to a spectacle in front of strangers. Cameras recorded, voices protested, but none of it mattered as she was led away, dignity stripped, forced into the back of a cruiser like a criminal. For many, this is where the story would end, a scar of injustice etched into memory. But Camille was no ordinary woman. What neither the officers nor the crowd knew was that this arrest would set into motion a chain of events that no one could have predicted, because the woman they had wrongfully arrested would not remain silent. She would fight back with the sharpest weapon she had always carried, the law itself. Inside the back of the police cruiser, Camille's reflection blurred in the glass as the city streets rolled past. Years spent defending clients against injustice had never prepared her for the suffocating weight of steel cuffs digging into her skin. She had stood beside countless victims of racial profiling, had argued passionately in courtrooms about the dangers of unchecked authority. But now she wasn't the advocate, she was the accused. At the station, the indignities only multiplied. The booking process was cold, mechanical, and humiliating by design. Fingerprints pressed onto cards, a mugshot snapped under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, her personal belongings sealed away as if she were dangerous. Officers smirked, some with smug indifference, others with quiet disdain. Their message was clear. Here, her education, her title, her years of service meant nothing. She was just another black body behind bars. Hours passed before anyone addressed her again. When charges were finally read, resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer, the absurdity nearly stole her breath. These weren't charges grounded in truth. They were tools, fabricated to cover the officer's missteps and justify their aggression. Camille knew she could fight them in court. But what burned deeper than the false accusations was the reality that her experience wasn't unique. How many others, without legal training, without resources, had been swallowed by this same system and left voiceless? When she was released on bail that night, the cool air felt almost foreign. Her friend and colleague, Marissa, was waiting. Concern shone in her eyes, but Camille brushed it off with a hollow, "I'm fine." Inside, though, she was anything but. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every injustice she had spent her career fighting to dismantle. That very night, she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and law books. She began drafting the framework of a lawsuit, not just to clear her own name, but to hold the department accountable. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a simmering determination. For too long, people like her had been told to stay quiet, to move on, to not make it worse. She refused. Within days, a video surfaced. The young woman in the park who had recorded the arrest posted it online. It spread rapidly, shared, reshared, dissected by thousands. Strangers messaged Camille, some offering legal support, others simply sharing stories of how they too had been harassed, profiled, or degraded. The viral footage transformed her case from an isolated incident into a spark for broader outrage. The community rallied. Activists reached out. College students invited her to speak. Residents demanded town halls with police leadership. Camille, though exhausted, made time for them. She listened, she spoke, she connected. Her fight had become a symbol, a reminder. That dignity stolen in public could be reclaimed with courage and persistence. But momentum came with consequences. Her law firm hesitated, worried about public image. Some colleagues urged her to step back, to protect her career. Still, Camille stood firm. The more resistance she faced, the clearer her mission became. She wasn't simply building a case for herself. She was building a case for justice, for everyone silenced by the same system. Weeks passed, and then came the call that changed everything. Her attorney informed her that the very officers she was suing were also under investigation for excessive force in another case, and by an extraordinary twist of fate, Camille had been assigned as the presiding judge. The irony was staggering. The woman once handcuffed by their authority would now sit in judgment over them. It was a twist no one could have scripted, and it set the stage for a confrontation that would test not just Camille's strength, but the very meaning of justice. itself. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation, though the case on the docket wasn't particularly high profile. To most, it was just another misconduct hearing, two officers accused of using excessive force during a routine stop. But for Camille, seated high on the bench in her black robe, it was far from routine. When she stepped out from her chambers, the room shifted, conversations hushed, eyes widened. The defendants, Officers Carter and Daniels, stiffened in their seats as realization hit. Their faces betrayed shock and discomfort. Just weeks earlier, these were the men who had paraded her through a park in handcuffs, dismissing her protests as if her voice meant nothing. Now, she was the one commanding the room. The irony was thick, but Camille didn't indulge in it. She carried herself with calm precision, every movement deliberate. "This court is now in session," she announced, her voice steady and authoritative. The gavel struck, and the hearing began. As the prosecution laid out the charges, the air grew heavier. Witnesses spoke of unnecessary aggression, of force used where none was warranted. A young man named Ethan took the stand, describing how he was tackled during a traffic stop despite complying with every order. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. "They treated me like I was guilty before I could even speak." Camille listened intently, pen gliding across her notes. But inside, each detail echoed her own experience: the baseless suspicion, the escalation without cause, the suffocating imbalance of power. She knew the pattern. She had lived it. Yet she forced herself to remain impartial, to let the evidence, not her memory, guide the proceedings. The defense countered with excuses. The situation escalated. The officers feared for their safety. They acted on instinct. But the justifications rang hollow. Camille had heard them all before, in case after case. They were the same rationalizations used to shield misconduct, the same refrains meant to obscure accountability. Then came the moment of confrontation. Officer Carter was called to testify. He shifted uncomfortably as he rose, his once confident demeanor cracked. Taking the oath, his eyes flickered toward Camille. It was brief, but unmistakable. He recognized the imbalance had reversed. The prosecutor pressed him. Why had he tackled an unarmed, compliant man? Why escalate without cause? Carter stammered, fumbling for words. At first, he leaned on protocol, insisting he made a judgment call. But when asked if he still believed his actions were justified, silence filled the room. His hesitation said more than any excuse could. Daniels fared no better. His testimony wavered between defensiveness and regret. Each answer only tightened the noose of accountability around their case. Their voices, once so commanding in the park, now cracked under the weight of scrutiny. Throughout it all, Camille's composure never wavered. Yet beneath the robe, her pulse raced. This wasn't revenge. It couldn't be. Her role as judge demanded fairness, even toward those who had denied it to her. She knew the world was watching, both inside that courtroom and beyond. The viral video had made her a symbol, and symbols could not afford missteps. As closing arguments drew near, the prosecution delivered a devastating summary. "This is not an isolated mistake," the prosecutor declared. "It is a pattern of abuse, a reminder of what happens when authority goes unchecked. These officers were sworn to protect and serve, yet they chose to intimidate and harm. Justice demands accountability." The defense tried to salvage what little ground they had left, appealing for leniency, painting the incident as a lapse rather than a pattern. But even their words lacked conviction. Carter and Daniels sat with shoulders slumped, their eyes downcast, as if already bracing for what was to come. When Camille struck her gavel to adjourn for the day, the room exhaled in unison. The tension had been unbearable, the irony unforgettable. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something rare, justice bending back against those who had twisted it. For Camille, the day ended not with triumph, but with weight. Hardest part was yet to come. Soon she would have to deliver her ruling. And in that decision lay more than the fate of 2 officers. It carried the hopes of a community, the trust of countless victims, and the question of whether the system could ever truly hold itself accountable. The following week, the courtroom was overflowing. Word had spread of the astonishing twist. The woman once arrested by these very officers was now presiding over their misconduct case. Reporters lined the back wall, pens and cameras ready. Activists, community members, and ordinary citizens filled every seat. To them, this was more than a hearing. It was a test of justice itself. When Camille entered in her black robe, the room fell silent. She carried no outward sign of nerves, though her heart beat heavily beneath the fabric. She wasn't just here as Camille Johnson, the attorney who had once been humiliated in a public park. She was here as Judge Johnson, entrusted to embody fairness even when fairness had been denied to her. The atmosphere was thick as she began. The role of law enforcement, she said firmly, is to protect and serve the community with integrity, respect, and fairness. When that trust is violated, the consequences ripple far beyond a single victim. Every word carried weight. Carter and Daniels sat at the defense table, their uniforms stripped of the authority they once wielded so carelessly. They stared at, their hands no longer able to meet her gaze. Camille continued, laying out her findings with precision. The evidence was overwhelming. Both testimony and footage showed that the officers had acted with unnecessary aggression, escalating situations that required none. Their conduct wasn't an isolated lapse, but part of a troubling pattern. Her ruling was firm. Both officers were to be suspended without pay, required to complete extensive retraining, and entered into the disciplinary record that would follow them throughout their careers. It wasn't the maximum punishment possible, but it was decisive. It sent a message that authority abused would not be ignored, not under her watch. The gavel struck. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Some nodded with relief. Others whispered debates about whether the punishment was enough. But one thing was undeniable. Justice had been served in a way rarely seen. The same system that had once humiliated. Camille now stood corrected, however imperfectly, by her own hand. As the room emptied, Officer Carter hesitated. He turned toward her, voice low and unsteady. "Your Honor, I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, hollow but heavy. Camille gave the slightest nod, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. She knew real change would not come from apologies. It would come from actions, policies, and accountability demanded again and again. Later that evening, Camille attended a community meeting at a local recreation center. The energy was electric. People were eager to share stories, frustrations, and hopes. Many had followed her case closely, and to them her ruling was more than a legal outcome. It was proof that standing firm, even when humiliated, could shift the balance of power. An older woman approached her, voice trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping Camille's hand. "What you did in that courtroom, it means the world to us." Camille smiled softly. "This is just the beginning," she replied. "There's so much more work to do." In the weeks that followed, ripples spread across Fort Collins and beyond. Conversations about policing, accountability, and reform took on new urgency. Town halls filled with voices demanding transparency. Local activists organized rallies not of anger alone, but of determination to build a system that protected rather than oppressed. Camille became a visible part of that dialogue, not as a victim, but as a leader using her platform to push for change. She spoke at colleges about the importance of civil rights. She met with lawmakers to discuss policy reform. She sat with grieving families whose loved ones had faced brutality, listening and lending her expertise. What had begun as a moment of humiliation in a park had evolved into something far larger, a movement of accountability, fueled by resilience and courage. Yet even as she carried the weight of leadership, Camille remained grounded. She knew her case was one of the rare ones that ended with accountability. For every Carter and Daniels who faced discipline, countless others went unchallenged. For every viral video, there were dozens of unseen injustices. The system was far from fixed. But progress, she realized, wasn't about one sweeping victory. It was about persistence, case after case, reform after reform, voice after voice, refusing to stay silent. And in that persistence lay hope. One afternoon, standing on the courthouse steps, Camille watched as a group of young activists gathered for a peaceful rally. They carried signs demanding justice, chanting for change, their voices echoing against the stone walls. She felt a swell of pride. The fight wasn't over, but seeing them reminded her that the torch was already being carried forward. Her own story had shown that power could shift, that even in a system built to suppress, there were cracks where justice could break through. And in those cracks, light could enter. As she turned to leave, her thoughts echoed like a quiet vow. This is the kind of justice worth fighting for. And to those listening now, the question lingers. If accountability is possible, what role will you play in demanding it?